So I mixed them up because of the reading presentations. Okay.
Two house typologies structure this learning block: the Alpine log house and the Tup Gong house of northern Laos. Timber construction is the dominant building method throughout the entire Swiss plateau, as much today as 800 years ago. Indeed, so long as tools were available to work with wood, timber has been used in Central Europe as a primary means of construction, which dates the construction method in its most rudimentary form back to the Bronze Age at the earliest. In these solid-looking buildings, logs that are usually hewed from larch wood are horizontally layered, with notches close to their ends that interlock with each other. Moss was used to fill the gaps in joints, overall creating an airtight construction. These buildings were built to last, and some in the central Schweiz region are still in existence today that were built in the 12th century. These gable-end alpine log buildings are built on a masonry plinth with a cellar that is not, or only a little, sunk into the ground. Above this, the log walls are raised 1 to 3 stories high, interlocking at the corners and central walls. Older buildings, dating from pre-1500, often let the interlocking edges project beyond the cellar walls, and it was traditional to add basins to the facades for flowering plants.
So just point out the image on your left-hand side. The ends of the timber are sticking out from the walls. That also happens at the corners where the pieces are making interlocking joints. And they also have a stone base, right, which gets the timber up off the ground, because timber is very prone to rotting, so you don't want it to be directly on damp earth. And then the gaps between the sort of quite roughly hewn timber logs are filled with things like moss, because this is a very cold climate, so we have to address making the building insulated, warm, airtight, making sure we don't have icy winds blowing in through the building. So there's some similarities to the other structures that we've looked at.
It was ideal for the extreme seasonal differences that happen across the year in Switzerland, with cold winters and thick snow and avalanches. Apologies for the thunder strike that just hit. It wasn't an avalanche, luckily. Now let us compare and contrast the Alpine log house construction with a different typology altogether, the Tup Gong house of northern Laos. Here, the tropical monsoon climate divides the year into 3 seasons: a rainy season from May until October, a cool, dry season from November to February, and a hot, dry season in March and April. Just like the Alpine log house, these buildings with their curved canopies and palm leaf roofs survive and are still constructed today as they were several hundred years ago due to their remote location. It is a region that has recently acquired the name Zomia. This is an interesting geographical terminology for us to consider in this module, since it relates to climate and social life. Zomia is a name for all the lands at altitudes above roughly 300 meters, from the central highlands of Vietnam to northeastern India, and traversing 5 Southeastern Asian nations: Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Burma, and 4 provinces in China: Yunnan, Guizhou, Guangxi, and parts of Sichuan.
So just commenting on the map so you can see what part of the world we're talking about here. So Dr. Davis is talking about climatic similarities due to the altitude of that particular region, which is above 300 meters above sea level. So in Singapore, we're roughly at sea level most of the time. How high is Bukit Timah Hill? The highest point is like 60-something meters. So we're basically at sea level. So this is a much higher elevation. So that gives these regions some similarities in terms of weather, flora and fauna, and the types of sort of architectural conditions people have to deal with.
What makes it interesting is its ecological variety, as well as its relation to states. It represents a novel object of study. Northern Laos, then, is a part of this vast region, and this is where we find the Tuk Gong house, a word that literally means curved canopy. Houses that bear a morphological similarity, meaning they look physically similar, can be seen throughout Southeast Asia, yet they all incorporate subtle differences from one ethnic group to the next. Differences that can be seen as much in the approach to building as the weaving patterns of traditional fabrics, clothing, song, and folklore.
Let's pause so you can take a look at the overall structure of the building, all of the timber structure, and also the framing that's holding up the slightly curved roof from which the building, the gong, gets its name. So we often associate curved roofs and fancy things like that with contemporary architecture, but there are parts of the world that have been doing this for millennia. So you can see how they've achieved the form. Usually these forms in the past are due to cosmological reasons rather than practical.
For this specific house type, the load-bearing structure is typically made of Fujian cypress, while the walls are clad using woven bamboo mats. It is the body that structures the dimensions of this house. Carpenters work with the following system: the distance between the fingertips of both outstretched arms, the distance from elbow to tip of the middle finger, the distance from thumb and forefinger, the width of the fist, and the distance from elbow to tip of the little finger.
Let's pause again. If you know anything about the Malay house, it's based on pretty much the same system, which is based on the measurements of the matriarch of the house. So the similar important measurements. So if you think about Western architecture, you have the Vitruvian Man. The Malay house has the ibu, the arms of the ibu, fingertip to fingertip. Similar here for the double gong house. So it's literally the measurements of the body of the people who are going to live there. It's very attuned to them and their location.
For example, the tensile beams that tie the central columns beneath the roof are measured using 4 times the dimension between the fingertips of both outstretched arms, plus the dimension between elbow and tip of the middle finger. When placed alongside one another, a range of productive differences can be discussed between the alpine log house.
That was a very good segue back into the alpine house. So we have a system of measurement, which is very precise and very attuned to the body, and definitely about the time and place. These measurements usually have some sort of spiritual or cosmological significance as well. So, for example, the use of whether these units are repeated in odd or even numbers will also have a significance. Yeah?
Gong house of northern Laos. Lightweight materials versus heavy ones, a tropical versus temperate climate system. Yet they are also remarkably similar in other ways. Both have extreme pitched roofs, are raised above the ground, and employ locally sourced timber.
Alright, so that's the end of trees. Next week we move into rivers. And I will also talk about how to write an abstract. Does anyone have any questions at all? Even fun questions? I like fun questions about random topics. No? Okay, in which case, consults are on Friday this week if you need one, and I'll see you next Tuesday morning.